Hey everybody, week 7, moving along, talking about discretion this week and that concept of police behavior that, I think it gets, well, we'll talk about this in a second. First, let's talk about last week. You had a discussion board on the militarization of the police. And this is another area where a lot of the issue gets overblown. I mean, it's the stuff that you see, the MRAPs and flashbang grenades and rocket launchers, I think is another thing I saw. Those are things that are used in exceptional times. People didn't like it at Ferguson. The cops didn't do themselves any favors in Ferguson, but they were faced with a pretty interesting threat. And there was a lot of bullets coming at them. Standing in the middle of a riot and hearing gunfire and not knowing where it's pointed is a pretty, disheartening thing to have to deal with. As far as rocket launchers, that's that less lethal idea of the sponge rounds. They're fired out of an M203 launcher or similar type, 40 millimeter, and they deliver a sponge round at a high rate of speed that it leaves a pretty nasty bruise, but generally, unless it's unfortunately placed or poorly placed, it just hurts a whole lot, and that will cause the threat to stop. At least that's the hope. There's so much complaint about the MRAP type vehicle, but you look at South Carolina last week, and that was used. It took an hour to get the vehicle there. Once that thing went bad, and once they were there, they were able to go in and exfiltrate wounded officers that otherwise couldn't get out of the line of fire. So, pretty good use of it there, and pretty necessary. I don't think this is a really clear-cut issue, and the reason I say that is because the sitting down reading a book is pretty easy to say, well, gosh, the police shouldn't do that, or anybody shouldn't do whatever you're talking about. But when you're the one getting shot at, it kind of makes it's a little bit different of a thing. Now the cops, on their part, are struggling with this community policing concept and what their self-image is. And not all cops, because it's really simple to say, put everybody in one basket. This is how everybody feels. But there's a significant amount of officers that do feel as though they are in a war zone. And part of that comes from the fact that the things that they have to do on a daily basis when they're dealing with people and going to calls, and homicides and, shootings and finding guns and being someplace and hearing guns going off all around them. That's not totally uncommon in many areas of the country, in many areas of Southern California for that matter. So the militarization is a much more complex issue than simply what kind of equipment the police have, and how people and commentators, discuss how the police, operate and what the expectations of the police are. So from that, we then go to this concept of discretion and police behavior. And I think the first thing I really want to get out of the table is that discretion is the selection of a course of action from legal choices. Now, commentators love to put in illegal choices in this area of discretion. Well, discretion is, you can only utilize discretion when you can do it legally. And if the police have a They could write a guy a ticket, or they could shoot him. And, certainly, all of those are on the table in that spectrum. But what are the legal choices? If the police pick an illegal choice, well, then they've committed misconduct. And it should be discretion, in my view, discretion and misconduct, not just the concept of discretion, encompassing all of the illegal things that could possibly happen in the course of a contact or investigation. The book, as most police books go into, and they talk about different factors of socialization of police officers. We talked a little bit about that in the past. They also talk about educational explanations, the sociological, the organizational, different explanations. And I think if we're honest, most cops are not going to fall under one of those theories. It's somewhat going to be sociological. It's going to be organizational. What that particular police department, what their values are. I know of a police department in California that's in a big mess because their organizational theme has been such that has allowed different levels of misconduct for a long time. And now organizationally they're trying to get a handle on that, but there's a whole bunch of discord within that department. And it's a matter of bringing in a new chief from the outside who's got a different set of values. So you've got an organizational problem. You have, for many years, up until probably maybe the late 1990s, 2000, early 2000s, that a really well-educated officer was kind of an anomaly. And oftentimes you had an educated officer comes in, whether it be a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree of some sort, and they were kind of shunned by the department because they didn't have any real experience, and they were basing all of their successes off their education. Well, that's changed and shifted dramatically. Many agencies now have a vast majority of their officers that have bachelor's degrees. If you're thinking about going into law enforcement, you're thinking bachelor's degree, I'm in. Well, in some agencies you are, but in many agencies, that is the new MQ, the new minimum qualification, and it's not a GED or a high school diploma. It's gone beyond that. Ton of pressure within a police department as far as conformity goes. The idea of having officers that have really varied and different opinions, politically or organizationally, like most organizations, people are pushed into a particular thought process mindset. And the police departments, were the same way. Because you have to sit back and think, well, on the patrol level, how is that going to be, what's the boiling point that pulls that together? How does it brew? And unfortunately, it brews in tragedy and violence and death, to where, those are the factors that really stick out in your mind. The New York case with the limo, I don't know what the deal is on that yet, but if you haven't heard, 18 people are in a limo going to celebrate a birthday party or something, and the limo tangles with another car, 2 people in the other car, and 18 people in the limo are all killed. Well, that's, somebody's got to sift through that. Somebody's got to be the first responder. And if you are the first responder on that, and you're pulling dead people out of the car, and then checking vitals and, making pronouncements, That's not something that you're going to go home that night, sit down and, have your family dinner and, talk to the kids about how their soccer game was. That's going to bother you. It's going to cause you issues. So you put those factors into the cauldron of police work, and then you add the fact that most people are trying to take advantage of you in some way. Most people think that you have the capability of solving problems to a much greater level than you do. You would be surprised how many people call the police, and as they're talking to the police, they don't really want to hear the advice of the police. What they want to hear is the police saying, you got the solution, you're doing great, you don't need me. Go ahead and do what you're doing. And that's just not the case. So that's where the sociological factors, and I think maybe it's due to the time in the book. I think the book and commentators in general could do more, a greater, do more for that idea, spend more time with it, and just, sometimes just cut officers some slack, because obviously it's not an easy job, and it's going to be difficult for any human being to go through those things and then move out and maintain this positive, rosy attitude towards people in general and the job they're doing. That brings us to the concept of stress and how significant the stress is. And you've got police officers will generally tell you there's two kinds of stress. There's the outside stress of the kind of calls that we just talked about. The fact that most cops are pretty confident they're not going to get killed in any particular deal, but they're pretty concerned that they're going to get hurt, and that you could get hurt on something as simple as a car stop and getting picked off by a car, another car in a roadway. Somebody that wants to assault you just shoves you really hard, and you land, and as you fall backwards, your head hits the ground, and you sustain a closed brain injury. I mean, those are all things that happen to to officers. Exposure to toxic chemicals and this idea of stress and what does the stress do to the body. Are there long-term cancer problems that come up from that, and deterioration of the body itself? Many officers retire medically, and oftentimes it's due to just the working conditions. Wearing a gun belt, 30-pound gun belt in your hips for 20, 25, 30 years. Can be very difficult on a person, and that will cause them to have some serious health issues. And then the tough one to talk about is police suicide. I've had people close to me murdered in the field, and I've known a few other officers that have died in other instances, but then there's suicide, and I know more people that have killed themselves, more officers have killed themselves than officers that have been murdered in the 32 years that I was in the business. And it's an extremely difficult thing to deal with. Cops have a method at their side all the time. Many people will look at suicide and go, how can somebody do that to their family, to their kids, to their friends? And for many people it makes sense because they're just done. They're done. And, it's a difficult thing to ponder. If you go into the business, I can only ask you to be very careful about your associations, your relationships, and then maintaining an even keel with stuff. Stress can be handled through other things. That's why I teach. I became involved in the teaching profession because I didn't want to see the majority of people in their 20s as being involved in crime. Because that's who's involved in crime, 16 to 26. I didn't want to have that feeling that when I was around people other than other cops, that I always had to be on guard and waiting for something bad to happen. So you can outside interests, you can do a lot of different things that will help mitigate the stress. You can stay close to your family, your church, if that's your belief system. So with that, that's the week on stress. You're going to have a paper coming up this week. Will be your rough draft, and then the following week will be the final draft. So hopefully this will work out a little better for you, make it easier for you to keep things organized. And with that being said,